My name is Julie Womack. I am the Chief Organizing Officer for Red, Wine, and Blue. I'm here with Julie Collins, who is our national organizer. I'm going to turn it over to Julie and Shereen to talk about how abortion actually impacts economically, which I don't think a lot of people talk about that. There's a lot of stories being shared, but that is not one of them that you hear a lot. So I'm really excited to hear this presentation.
Hi, Shereen. Just give like a couple seconds of who you are and what you do, and then we'll get right into it.
I'm Shereen Boyer. I'm from Akron, Ohio, and I am passionate about all the things that Red, Wine, and Blue is supporting. I've got 30 years of experience in the financial field. And so one of the things that I find interesting is when you take a look at a lot of these issues from an economic standpoint, there's a perception that the Republican side is historically more economically responsible. But what I have discovered is when you look really at the last 25 or 30 years, it really doesn't hold true. We talked about this a little bit last month, that the more economically responsible party is actually the Democratic Party, and the Republicans are really kind of riding on their coattails of this age-old perception. So hopefully tonight we can put a little chink in the armor again and just bring some of those issues to the fore for people to keep in mind.
Well, I know that when you were here the last time and you were breaking that down for folks, you made it really, really understandable. So let's get into the economics of abortion. What made you think to do this particular subject?
I'm passionate about reproductive rights.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, because there's been such an onslaught with the overturning of Roe v. Wade and a number of states trying to get things passed through citizen-led amendments, of which there are only 18 states that can do that. 6 have done it. Ohio this year is the only one where that can happen. That really came to mind. And then, of course, I look at everything through an economic lens. I'm a big believer that if you put forth programs, you have to be able to sustain them, and they have to make sense. And they have to not just make sense for the participants, but society as a whole. And so when I started to think about abortion, so oftentimes it comes down to a moral question. And I would not, if somebody has that conviction, I don't think an economic argument would sway them. But there's a big chunk of us in the center who are able to not just look at that one aspect of it, but consider what about the quality of life for the person giving birth, or what about the impact on my community with jobs, or what about, what's my impact on the state? And when you kind of pull that focus out from that one individual point, it really is a much more complex, and there's a lot of economic reasons that rolling back reproductive rights has a lot of negative economic consequences.
Well, and nobody at all is talking about this, so I'm really fascinated. So where do you want to begin?
Well, I thought maybe we could just, a couple of minutes on a bit of history. And so we all know that Roe v. Wade came about in 1973, but just to kind of plant the idea of reproductive rights at that moment in history, we had the right to an abortion in the United States a year before women could get a credit card in their own name. We had the right to an abortion in the United States the same year that it became a national policy that women could serve on juries in all 50 states. So imagine being a jury of your peers, except depending on the state, you may or may not have had any women sitting on that jury. We had reproductive rights 5 years before you could file a sexual harassment claim in the workplace, and 6 years before you could be fired for being pregnant. And when I look at this, to me, all of those issues kind of come together. And I think that when we look at reproductive rights, that may be the string that's being pulled right now, but lots of other issues tie to that. And as we have seen, when you start to roll back established rights for one group, lots of other things start to get pulled back. Having the ability to choose if and when a person who's able to get pregnant has a child is a fundamental right for that individual, but it also has a tremendous impact on them in the moment, on their educational attainment, on their economic attainment, and also studies have shown it goes down generationally. And so we're in a little bit of uncharted waters right now, because although Roe v. Wade has been overturned, we really have a patchwork of different rules governing that across the country. And so as I think about this, we're gonna try and break this down by kind of looking at the broad economic issues. Then we're going to kind of look at the economic challenges and damages within the healthcare system, which is a substantial part of the broad economy. And then we're going to look at sort of the individual stories and how this could affect an individual.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead. Let's go ahead.
All right, but so one of the things that we're sitting with right now is, prior to the Dobbs decision, it was established law. And so both businesses and individuals were able to rest comfortably in the fact that they understood what the rules were and what the rules for engagement are. As we sit here now, there's a high level of uncertainty, and it's a high level of uncertainty for businesses. And that patchwork of laws and benefits makes it much more difficult for businesses to do business. It's more costly, it's more uncertain, it's more expensive. And so just to give you an example of something that has actually happened that we can look at, if you look at England, when they passed Brexit a few years ago, what they basically did is they cut themselves off from the rest of the European Union with regard to trade. And when they created that border between England and the rest of Europe, they created a network of problems for themselves, which were not immediately apparent, and I think is a good parallel to where we stand at this moment with reproductive rights. That when you look at it, you can see what's coming, but if you look at the data, it hasn't hit us yet. And so you look at England now a few years down the line, and a number of businesses have pulled out because it's too difficult to do business outside of your major market. They're having trouble getting workers. They're having to negotiate different rules with 27 or 28 different member states. And so when we look at reproductive rights, businesses don't change overnight, but you can absolutely see the writing on the wall that if they have to, instead of dealing with one national policy toward reproductive rights, if they have to go and figure out in 50 states what their benefits package is going to be, how they're going to try and create equity among workers, how they're going to deal with disparities between states, how they're going to attract workers who may value those things differently, it creates a huge amount of uncertainty and cost for those businesses. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm in HR, and so immediately I'm thinking about at the county level, we have paid maternity leave,
Right.
so those costs are going to go up, right? Because you're going to have forced birth, basically.
You would think so. That is certainly one of the possible outcomes. Another possible outcome may be that with time, employees relocate to other states, or they're not able to attract the talent. And so there are all these shifts that it's kind of like a snow globe. We picked it up, we've shaken it, and we really don't know how it's going to fall out. But we know that with uncertainty, costs increase. And we know that with an uncertain legislative future for what these benefits are, both businesses and employees are trying to factor that in. And so we've added this wild card. And I think the wild card acts as a drag on those businesses. If we look at other sort of economic examples, if a business is uncertain about, let's say, a tariff or regulation that's going to be coming, what they typically do is they just slow everything down and they wait until they get clarity on what that issue is. However, with this, we're in the midst of it, right? We had this as established law. It got flipped on its head. Both businesses, regionally, nationally, and multinationally are trying to then contend with this policy, and that becomes quite expensive and quite disruptive. And so that is a real negative to corporate America. If you don't know what benefits you can offer, if you don't know if in some states they'll be viewed as a felony, and in another state they won't be. If you're headquartered in Texas and you provide as part of your national plan reproductive rights in states that aren't restricting those rights, what does that mean for that business? And so there's just a host of questions, more questions than answers, but none of the answers lead you to clarity and less regulation and certainty. And I think when it comes to this issue, that's always a negative and that's always a drag for a business. You know, if we brought that down to a family level, if you had to make a major decision and you didn't know any of the facts around that, and you didn't know how it was going to affect you, you tend to just pull back and wait until you get clarity, right? So if you're you know, planning on, let's say you wanted to buy a retirement home in another state, but you don't know what the tax laws concerning that purchase are going to be, and you don't know how they're going to treat the mortgage or the deductibility, and you don't know what the taxes are going to be, and you don't know how they're going to do the insurance. It would bring that sort of second home, retirement home market to a complete halt, because who would buy in the face of no information? Right. It's similar with businesses in that there's such a range of treatment of this, and there's so much uncertainty about it, and it's such an emotional and personal issue at the same time, highly political, but also highly personal, that it leaves businesses in a no-win situation in a lot of cases. You know, I'm looking past the sort of outliers who want to either you know, make a hard stand with, you know, your Hobby Lobbies. Putting those aside, they've made a different economic choice. But broadly speaking, businesses are in the business of making profits, and they're not in the business of this other stuff. So aside from the Hobby Lobbies, that's what we're talking about.
Well, and I can tell you as an HR professional, it is incredibly difficult to find good help and employees these days. It's really, really difficult. So this is just definitely going to add another wrinkle in the mix.
Undoubtedly.
No?
And if you look at like, I went and just pulled the election statistics from the 2020 presidential election. And, you know, in Texas, more than 46% of voters voted for Biden. And we could kind of extrapolate from that. That means, you know, a pretty substantial percentage of the population probably does not agree with the rules and regulations that they're living under. And in Florida, it was even higher. It was closer to 48%. Mm-hmm. And so if you're trying to attract talent and you're trying to create a policy, and you're a national or multinational corporation, if you think about a multinational corporation, instead of now operating in one country, the United States of America, they conceivably have to come up with 50 different policies. Mm-hmm. They have to understand the laws in 50 different states. And they have to, it's incredibly complex and expensive. And it's for all of the talk about let's support businesses because businesses employ people. It really creates a real mess of that policy. Mm-hmm. And because people who can give birth are a substantial amount of the population, the working population, and those that can't give birth, a lot of those people have concerns, or they have a person in their lives that they would be affected as well. And so it creates a real challenge for how that's going to work out. Just pulling a news story from the news, some of you may have seen that Governor Newsom in California and Walgreens are in the news. And Walgreens has, and there's some question. I read 2 or 3 different articles on this, and it doesn't look to me like it's completely settled. But Governor Newsom basically came out and said in the last day or 2 that the state of California would no longer do business with Walgreens. And that's because Walgreens, according to him, had said that they would no longer offer All right, let me see if I can pronounce this drug correctly. Mifepristone, the abortion drug that is being considered in Texas. Am I getting that right? Mifepristone? So somebody jump in and correct me, but I'm in finance, not in medicine. But and so Walgreens is now caught in this sort of political battle where it becomes incredibly difficult for them. They're saying they won't offer it in any of the 20 states. Now California is saying that we won't do business with you. What is a business to do? It's an untenable situation going forward. How do they do that? No matter which way they go, because the law is unsettled, and it is a patchwork. There's really no way forward. Now, some of the Democratic states are coming forward and saying, absolutely not. You will offer it every place where it's legal. But again, imagine just the legal costs that they're going to incur. They have over 9,000 pharmacies across the United States. How do they go about giving access to patients who need that and complying with all of those laws while caught in this incredible political storm? That's
going to impact the legal system too, because aren't there probably or likely to be lawsuits on both sides?
Oh, undoubtedly. And how does the business operate during that period? The lawsuits could drag on for many years. And you think about, again, big picture, we're going to get down to the individual because at the end of the day, this really is a very personal individual right and choice. But how is a business supposed to go forward with that? In many businesses, half or more of their employees potentially in a group that's affected. It's a real nightmare. I think that healthcare and the individual are kind of tied together a bit, because I think what has really, really been lost in this discussion is that this is not just about you have an unplanned pregnancy and want to terminate that pregnancy. This is also about complications when you're having a pregnancy and doctors don't know whether to treat you or how far to let you go. And as a person who lost her mom, my mother is one of the Black maternal health statistics. I lost her 39 years ago. This is not cool to me at all. We should be able to get care. And I mean, all folks who, give birth or are able to give birth should be able to get care when the care is needed. It should not be tied up in, oh, well, I don't know if I need to wait until they're bleeding more or their heart is affected, or, they're playing with people's lives, and this is awful. Oh, absolutely.
So let's kind of dive into, into those two things. I'm sure that you had a way of, how you wanted to do this, but, just go ahead.
Well, all of the sorts of things that you mentioned, and thank you for sharing that about your mom. It's powerful. And I think it is worth stating that reproductive rights or lack of them disproportionately affect the young, lower income, and people of color. And so, while it really is an issue that can touch all lives, we have seen to devastating effect that those three groups are hit the hardest. And you're so right that termination of pregnancy is one of the things, and often the thing it's focused on, but there are many, many other situations. And I just kind of took a look at just to give you a couple of statistics that I thought were kind of interesting. So the average OBGYN in the United States graduates with about $200,000 in debt. And the average income, and this is according to the most recent statistics that were available, which is 2019, earns about $238,000. Okay, so they come out after all of these years of education and medical training, about $200,000 in debt. The average, they earn about $238,000. But they don't just treat pregnancies, right? The other things that OBGYNs do, they look for cervical cancer. They deal with yeast infections, PMS, precancerous screenings, menopause treatments, infertility, endometriosis. So they cover a lot of just broad healthcare issues. And because this one particular issue of abortions, they are facing in many states felony charges, devastating their practice. And if you were looking at the economic side of that from either a hospital standpoint or a medical practice or an individual trying to decide what they were going to go into, the amount of risk that is now associated with this is far more than in a lot of other specialties. And we're already seeing that we're seeing access to care around the nation being restricted. And it doesn't just affect a woman or person who's able to give birth who wants to terminate a pregnancy. It also affects cancer screenings and cervical cancer and all those other issues. And so by making this a one issue thing, we're really missing the bigger picture, which is the healthcare system and our ability to access it, or somebody that you love access it for care for women is really under attack. And that's the kind of thing that when people decide to retire or leave or move or close up shop, that doesn't turn around quickly. That is a generational kind of loss. And when we think about this, so we're increasing the uncertainty. I took a look at for-profit hospitals, which, healthcare in our country is another whole question. But I just took a look at the top 5 states with for-profit hospitals. In Nevada, over 53% of their hospitals are for-profit. In Texas, it's 52%. In Florida, it's 48%. In New Mexico, it's 42%. In Arizona, it's 41%. And so when you're driving up the costs and you're adding potential felony charges, and you are a for-profit hospital who is not there, their mission is not to serve the community. Their mission is to turn a profit for their investors. Mm-hmm. And you have this run directly into this issue. We've all seen the stories on the news about, regional health centers closing down, inability to get access, both from the business side of the hospital model, but also if you think about it from an individual doctor wanting to go into this, if you are trying to make a choice for a patient, and in that calculation is now, are you going to be convicted of a felony and lose your practice, lose your ability to practice? It's unworkable. It's unworkable.
Someone brought up malpractice insurance in the chat, and malpractice insurance as a rule is already ridiculously high. It's also ridiculously high for OBGYNs and people who do surgery. I can't imagine that the price of malpractice insurance isn't going to skyrocket as they begin to take advantage of these, the uncertainties and the risk for them, because if their doctors are sued, they have to pay those claims.
That's absolutely true. And in fact, I pulled up, in LA, and the cost of malpractice insurance for OBGYNs varies state by state, depending on a number of factors. So, for example, our settlement's capped. So if you're in a state where if you're sued, there's a cap on how much the lawsuit can win. They're lower. So in LA right now, the average OBGYN, it's about $50,000 a year for malpractice. In Connecticut, it's about $170,000. And so again, we've seen that when there is no repercussions to bad outcomes, and medicine is uncertain, but if there's no repercussions to a doctor who has chronically failed to meet the standard, right? That's also dangerous. And so the idea that we are creating a healthcare system that makes it almost economically impossible over time. And malpractice insurance, by the way, doesn't cover felonies. So if it's determined in Texas or wherever that if you terminate a pregnancy, that's a felony, there's no practice, you can't insure yourself against a crime. And so we've seen a number of stories in the news about families who wanted the children, There were health risks to the mother. There was a health, there's a lot of emotional trauma that goes with that. So we are really dealing another blow to the healthcare system on the back of the pandemic, which has already left the healthcare system and healthcare workers exhausted, worn out, at odds with many in their community that they tried to serve. And on top of this, now we add this additional layer of difficulty in terms of giving good medical care to your patients. And there's the other issue that if you are in a state where you don't have access to this, and people are now traveling to states where they do have access, that now creates lines, over demand, an inability to meet that demand. And many states have limits on the number of weeks that you can have an abortion. And so if you are going to another state and you're now encountering a longer wait because other people who can give birth are also flowing into that state. So even if you happen to be in a state where you have your rights protected, you still could come up against this because we're now seeing people flow in from other states. And so it's a pile-on effect. And there's no immediate ability to show the direct economic outcome because we're in the early days. But again, I look back to with Brexit, you could see exactly where it was going, right? Like my parents used to say to me, do you have to do that? You know what's going to happen if you do it. We know what's going to happen. And we're watching this sort of slow motion roll toward it where hospitals are closing down. Fewer people in medical school are likely to enroll and go into that. Again, it was just overturned last year. So we're going to start to get that data over the upcoming years. And I'm confident that it's going to point to a real blow to women's health, not just women who are pregnant, not just people who are pregnant, but to cancer patients, to people going into menopause, to all of those kinds of things that OBGYNs treat.
What I was thinking about in the whole malpractice realm is the whole idea in some of these places of the waiting until someone is so bad because you don't want to lose your license for, giving them good health care.
Right.
And so that waiting is damaging to the person who, is pregnant. Somebody else said that it also creates women's healthcare deserts, like in Mississippi. OBGYNs are leaving states where abortion is not an option for women because it's healthcare. We may soon not have doctors to care for pregnant people.
Or women, not just pregnant people. They're absolutely right in Mississippi. It's not just pregnant people that go to OBGYNs, right? Mm-hmm. You get your cancer screenings at your OBGYN. Absolutely, there's going to be a 2-class system for healthcare. And those who can move will likely move. But again, that leaves younger people, that leaves people lower on the economic ladder, having difficulty accessing it. And it's really a question of what kind of country do we want to be? What kind of country do we want to be?
Well, I don't know if you looked at universities, but someone mentioned universities and, the ability of folks to make choices about, do you want to go to a school in a place where you want to be able to get healthcare? But Alex says that 45% of accredited OBGYN schools are in states that ban abortion. So at most 56% of students will receive training to administer safe abortion care. So again, this is taking people who are in their reproductive years, lives. They're just playing roulette. I also have daughters in their 30s, so I mean, this is just very serious. This is not what it's being couched to be. And I think that's what really frustrates me.
I agree with you completely. And it really is an attack on women's health care. And they're doing it through reproductive rights. But that is an excellent point about the universities and the training. If you just followed that thread through to its natural conclusion, right? 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to see potentially half as many OBGYNs coming out. Think about what that would mean. Or they're graduating without just fundamental training and understanding of how this works. And instead of seeing better long-term outcomes, we see worse. And I saw somebody in the comments mention, what about the children? It's true. Good prenatal care comes with better outcomes for the children. And better outcomes for the children set them up for a lifetime. So it is a real problem. And I think one of the things that maybe we want to pivot to is talking about the individual stories. And I'm always conscious about the difficulty of telling an individual story. And I think one of the things about abortion and its impact on the broad economy, on the healthcare, is that we do tend to just talk about abortion, but it really affects the broader healthcare system. And it doesn't just affect people during their reproductive years. It affects their children. It affects those of us who are past childbearing years, but still use the services and need an OBGYN. And so funny you said roulette wheel, because I actually thought the same thing, and I made a little roulette wheel that if you happen to be a person who doesn't get pregnant, right? You maintain all of your choices about your educational path, your economic path, if and when you want to start a family. But if you fall into the group that doesn't, there's a whole range of things that might happen to you. And really what we're saying is we're just going to spin the wheel, and they lose control of their ability to decide what that is. So maybe they live in a state where there's no abortion, but your employer will pay for you to travel. So now you get to have that conversation with your employer to try and get time off work and to be reimbursed by that. Who wants to have that conversation, that very private information, and have to disclose that to an employer in order to get time off and to be reimbursed for travel? So even the companies that offer that, it's such a violation. Or, you spin the wheel, maybe you're going to be, you're going to get a generational decrease in education and economic, because when people lose the ability to control when they have a child, it also means they lose the ability to plan their life. And so if we took, let's say, something that people plan for, like retirement, or let me make it even less than that. Let's just say like a vacation. If instead of planning for the family vacation the day before, maybe you're taking a car, maybe you're taking a train, maybe you're getting on a plane, nobody knows. You don't know how you're going to get there. You don't know when you're going to get there. And then when you arrive there, right? Like say you want to go to France, and you spin the wheel and I'm driving my car. Well, that's no longer an option for you. So if you are young or lower on the economic ladder, or a person of color, the chances of an unplanned pregnancy derailing your educational plans, particularly as it pertains to high school graduation and college, your career prospects, it's very high. And if you get off that path early, it's very difficult to recover. And it's not just the parent who loses that, it's the children who lose the benefit of that. There's a study that says the best indicator of academic outcomes for a child is the academic attainment of their mother.
People are talking about tubal ligations in the chat, because some of these hospitals are denying that. And Julie had that happen to her 18 years ago. I had it happen a little bit longer after my second child. I was denied the ability to do that because they said I was too young, even though I had two children that I had given birth to, plus my baby sister who we had because my mom had passed away. And so that was not enough. The 3 children was not enough at 24 for me to be able to do that. So at 27, I had another baby, and so consequently, I did not get my college education until 2018, 19, and this coming May. And I'm going to be 58, but I had to wait until I was in my 50s until I could do that. And I literally was able to finally get my tubes tied at 50 and a half, because I had not gone through menopause yet. And I, was, with my now husband, and, we didn't want to take that chance. And I had an issue, and they were doing one procedure that would make it very dangerous for me to get pregnant, and I was still fertile at 50 and a half. And so, I mean, it's just, this is absolutely crazy that we're going to go to a point of, we're not going to be able to choose. You know, I think about folks who have, who work campaigns, you know, this has been discussed before. They plan when they're going to have a child. Teachers can do that sometimes to, you know, make sure that they are going to have that baby over the summer, be able to, you know, do their maternity leave and then go back in the fall. You know,
Sure.
We're not going to be able to have those choices. And that's just, to me, it's horrendous and horrific and very scary. It's terrifying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you so much, and congratulations for getting those degrees. But what would it have been for you if you'd been able to do that in your 20s?
Right. And what would it have been for my kids?
Exactly. Exactly. So when you think about it, the average cost to raise a child in the United States is about $250,000. So it's kind of like a Russian roulette wheel. Maybe you're going to maybe you're going to get that and unexpectedly be buying the equivalent of a house in a lot of places, and you have no control over if and when and how that happens. If you look at the US military, there's another place where women in the military wouldn't be able to control when they would have children. And there are a lot of benefits. There are housing benefits, there are educational benefits. The military has traditionally been a path out of, you know, for rural folks to get on a ladder to a different kind of life and access those benefits. And if you get pregnant there, all of that goes away. Medical school, same thing. It derails what you do. And that loss of choice and the whole range of consequences that can come with that are just devastating. They're not only for the person involved, but you're so right, for their children. That if you take somebody who is young and unprepared to be a parent, and then you add that responsibility and that cost by denying them access to abortion, and then in an unbelievably cruel twist, as the other side would then cut Medicaid and cut benefits and cut support. So now we're basically saying, you know, we won't let you have a choice in whether you have the child, and then we're going to make it especially hard for the young, the poor, and people of color to access reproductive rights. We're going to slow everybody else down because we've jammed up the system, and now we're going to make sure that because we believe in, you know, we believe in hands off and individualism, except when it comes to women's bodies, they're, you know, hands on. That we're going to cut all those programs and benefits. And, you know, there's a reason why traditionally older single women have been the poorest in the country. That group has been the poorest. There have been strides made. Geraldine Ferraro, I don't know if you remember that name, but she was the first female vice presidential candidate. It's thanks to her that if you and your husband get divorced, that you have a right to part of his pension. Prior to that, his pensioner's 401k. Prior to that, if you were married for 30 or 40 years and got divorced, you got nothing. We're making progress, but this adds a random element. And for those who hit the unlucky numbers on the roulette wheel, devastating. And the reality is none of us know who that's going to be. Could be us. It could be family members. It could be neighbors. And that uncertainty makes it harder to plan. And if you're not planning your education and going through that, you're going to see lower outcomes. And so it's just, you know, there's everything about this is just, it's just cruel. It's just cruel. The healthcare outcomes, the lack of choice, the inordinate pressure that it's going to bring to bear on parts of society that are least able to bear it. But even the pressure on folks who want the child and are excited about that and encounter a health issue. We've seen a number of stories in the paper. There was a case here in Ohio where the pregnancy had to be carried 3 weeks, knowing that the fetus wasn't viable. And
that's poisons you. That's very, very dangerous. It's awful.
Medically and also emotionally.
Yes.
And there's a very compelling article, ardent Trump supporters, and now they are ardent reproductive rights peoples, having lived through that. I think there was an assumption that because they wanted the child, that they would never have a need for this. And the truth is, one just doesn't know.
And here in Ohio, we also had a child who needed health care and had to go to a different state to get it because of this. And that was within, 5 days of the overturning. Somebody has mentioned that Tennessee's Department of Children's Services has unwanted children sleeping on the floors in offices because there are not enough foster parents. I know that is also happening here in Franklin County. So, it's happening in Ohio too. It's happening all over. So these children are, these folks are being forced to give birth, and then there's nowhere for these children to go.
And add to that there are 100,000 fewer daycare workers,
Right,
post-pandemic than there were prior to the pandemic, making it even more difficult for people to return or go to work. And so, it's absolutely true. This is a human right. This is a medical issue. But also, when you look at through the economic lens, it's a cost that everyone will bear. And what I'm hoping that this conversation tonight helps with is, as we try and bring some of these issues and get them on the ballot, that as we talk to our friends and neighbors, that there may be those who are persuadable through a different kind of argument. An argument about the difficulty in companies finding workers, and about the violation of sort of having to tell your employer if you want to terminate a pregnancy, in the fact that we are 100,000 short nationwide of daycare workers, and we're also incredibly short of workers in general. And the pandemic really reinforced what many of us know, which is that women carry the disproportionate amount of child rearing and child caring. And when you add all those things together, now you're not going to be able to plan it. You're going to have most of the weight on you. You're going to have extra economic costs. You're going to have spotty medical coverage. Many of the children are going to come out with lesser medical and educational opportunities, and that goes down generations. And as we've seen with other issues that we're trying to confront in this country, if you look at the history of racism in the country, that goes down generations, right? Wealth acquired years ago gets passed down, and if you miss those windows, you miss that ability to lift your family up over time. And so it's so important right now that we do this is our moment. This is our moment. And in Ohio, this is our year. We're the only state in the nation this year that is trying to get that amendment on the ballot. And it's really all hands on deck. And next year there'll be other states, and we'll have to show up there, because it is that important. It is that important.
We've got about 8 minutes left, so let me get through a couple questions here. So, have there actually been any estimates made about what a company or even a state could lose financially by banning abortion?
That's a great question. I don't think there really are good estimates. I attached in the reading list both the Republican and the Democratic views on the economic costs of abortion, because I thought it might be interesting to see both sides of that. But the problem is the abortion rights is just one factor, right? So you look at, say, companies relocating to Texas. The state tax is also a factor there, right? So that we're not entirely clear. Time will tell how that shakes out. What does seem clear is the impact is likely not to be felt in the next few years. Companies are headquartered where they're headquartered. Workers are located where they're located. But if you look out toward younger people joining the workforce, that group of people tends to be highly mobile. And so they have options in where they go. And that's likely where we're going to see that is out several years. And at that point, companies may begin to respond to it. But because they're for-profit companies, they only respond when the problem shows up, right? They don't, they're not going to respond to what might be 10 years down the line. They're going to respond to where they are in the moment. And so because this is a patchwork, because we're not even a year into this, because companies tend to sign long-term corporate leases, this is going to be a rolling issue.
Someone brought up too that wages have remained low for women in general anyway. We still have not caught up in the work world to our male peers. So that's also an issue and a problem, because now you're saying, that this person, has to give birth, and yet, that's when you are looking at hiring, are companies going to be paying women less because they're not going to be around because they're going to have to give births at some point? Are we going to go back to that?
Boy, that's such a full circle question. And I think that's the thing that makes all of us sort of sends a shiver down our spine. We started with Roe v. Wade in 73 and what the landscape was there. We've made progress in a number of fronts, but there's no doubt that when you take away a person's ability to choose when or if they have a child, you are going to absolutely take away their ability to plan the life that they want to have. Mm-hmm. And that will absolutely disproportionately affect women and people who can give birth. It's a spiral, like when you go to the beach and you pick up one of those shells and like each thing leads to another thing. And there's such an interconnectedness of these issues that, again, my hope is that if you're talking to somebody who might not be persuaded by the sort of traditional arguments, then talking about the economic arguments might be something that they're more receptive to. And that the difficulty, if you can center yourself in, if you were a business trying to hire and do this across 50 different rules and regulations, how difficult that would be. Many of our right-leaning people are very concerned about deregulation and, too much government intervention, and let's streamline it and make it simpler. And that may be something that they would respond to.
Well, I, for one, want to thank you so much for being here this evening and for sharing this, look at how this really is going to be devastating. There is going to be a reading list. If you want to tell everybody about the reading list that you're going to.
Yeah, I just put together a couple of things that might appeal to different kinds of people. So there's a New Yorker article that if you like to read things sort of in that format, there are a couple of data sheets there that if you're just looking for the facts, I included the Democratic position in the Senate on the cost of abortion. It's got a lot of really good information and is worth taking a look at. It talks about educational outcomes and those sorts of things. And then lastly, I included the Republican point of view, which states that basically they see it as a moral issue, but by the way, we need more workers, so this is a way to get to them. And I just included that if you wanted to sort of see what those talking points might be. So I hope that's helpful. There are links attached. Thank you all. I really appreciate you doing this. And if you feel a little frustrated at the end of this, I think that's kind of the normal place to be. There aren't like a single point that we can point to, but there's a lot of good information out there and there's a lot of reason for us to pull together. So thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Again, this was priceless.